Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, because we always do on my channel. This is a Dungeon Master Roundtable, and I have a bunch of guests, and they're going to help me figure out how to, or provide some ideas about how to run a mummy, make it fun and interesting in your Dungeons and Dragons game. But before we do that, I'm going to get everybody to introduce themselves first.
Hi, my name's AJ. I have a YouTube channel that has lots of D&D lore videos on monsters and locations and a few character classes. And today I'm going to be your mummy daddy.
Hi, my name is Baron Durop. I have a channel called Dungeon Masterpiece where you can learn to draw inspiration from history, cinema, literature, and video games in order to make your D&D games better.
How's it going? No fun allowed, and I'll be your mummy. That's fine. I'll be whatever you need me to be.
Okay, Ryan, what have you got us? We got mummies up on the platform today. The plate. What have you got in terms of ideas for mummies?
Mummies, if you step back from mummies for just a second and think about like what makes a mummy different from a lich, really the only thing is the stat block. So then you start leaning into the zeitgeist lore of what makes a mummy, and then you find yourself in Stargate SG-1. Like that's the Ancient Aliens is the next place you go. So what if your mummies are just extra dimensional travelers who come to the material plane on spaceships and, do what they do and enslave a race. And everybody thinks that they're a god because they're so powerful. But really, they just have a couple of magical constructs, ancient spellcasters, but they happen to be undead. And a cleric can just mess them up. They just don't understand how weak they actually are.
Yeah, I've always seen the relationship of the Lich is the person that went to Harvard and the mummy's the one that went to your community college and kind of like skated. So for that, the mummy, I like to make them be comical because, yeah, of course they're, they're technically immortal, but plenty of undead people do that all the time. But the mummy can just be this comical, tripping on their own wrappings and, shambling around. Maybe their body's just a little not perfect. I like to make them comical because one, it's always fun having a gag monster. But two, that makes it that much more horrifying if they do get their hands on you because they can do some really nasty stuff. That marauding fist ain't no joke. What about you, AJ?
Gag monster with its mummy wrappings. I like it. Children. So mummies, taking them from the lore of like where they come from. So they're creatures from mythology and their cultural significance and things like that. They're all about the bridge between the world of the living and the world of the dead. They are tied up with their magical wrappings. The bindings on the corpse of the mummy is where their power lies, and that is a trap that the mummy is cursed to keep coming back and protecting, or like it's basically like the phylactery of the lich is the wrappings of the mummy. So that's why burning the mummy is so effective, because you need to burn those wrappings to stop that corpse from coming back. The rot is part of the curse of the mummy. They're a plague on the living. The Magai from the Mummy movie saying, this place is cursed. You've woken a terrible, horrible disaster on the world because of your meddling in this place that was protected. So they're cursed to come back when certain conditions are met. So you've broken into their tomb, you've profaned their temple, you've offended the Shaolin, whatever it is. So it could be it's very specific to your setting or your campaign world. It doesn't have to be a tomb. It could be a library. It could be a family that this lich is this mummy is coming back to protect. It could also be a legal precedent. So your contract with a lich, for instance, could be sealed with a mummy. That if you break your contract, this thing is going to come back and get you. So there's that. The power of the mummy and those wrappings is also that the wrappings and the corpse may not be tied to each other. So if the corpse gets destroyed but a bit of the wrappings still exist, perhaps the wrappings just sort of slither off this thing, wrap themselves around another corpse, and it rises again, because the curse is that the soul is actually bound up in those wrappings, not the body at all. The body is just a rotten vessel that's infecting you with spores and fungus and all sorts of horrible things. Yeah, so it's a cursed existence. and the mummy may actually have the wherewithal to want to be free of it. But it's also a means of power that was kind of like the technology of the undead that was around before liches and lichdom was developed by the arcanists. So mummies are divine liches. They're not arcane liches. Yeah.
My idea was I picked up on the fact that they're sort of supposed to hold or could hold ancient knowledge. Mm-hmm. And I kind of like the idea of having a mummy who's a librarian of an ancient archive or for historical information or magical lore or spells or anything like that that's sort of around all the time, and you go and see them and reference them, and they find the manuscript or the book or whatever that you need, and a library that's so large that you probably can't ever find the end of it. You know, it's that big. So I kind of like the idea of that. Years ago, I was watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and yes, I know that's really, really bad. Bring that in line with like a mummy, and there's one story in there that sort of I picked up on, and that was that one of the characters in there, and I was thinking you could do it to one of your player characters. You could have one of your player characters wind up with a girlfriend who is in fact a mummy who is feeding off the living to make herself young or himself young, so that can take the wrappings off for a period of time, do their business, and then wrap themselves back up again and continue on feeding off somebody else. I kind of like the idea of a mummy who could sort of switch between the two, but the only way to maintain the image of being a living, breathing individual is they've got to feed off somebody else. Preferably not your player character, but your player character won't know that. You can run with that for quite some time.
Interesting. I like it. So the wrappings are like the phylactery, but the mummy has to feed itself to it, and then because that one of the great things about the start of that Mummy movie, the classic one with Brendan Fraser, was that the mummy starts off as this horrible desiccated corpse, and it's stealing the eyes and the vitality of its victims, and those are the people who are the ones who broke into the tomb in the first place. So they're suffering the brunt of its curse, and then it turns its attention on the rest of the world and bringing back Inoxinamun, its love interest from the past.
Yeah. So one thing I want to touch on is we see that Lich is associated with intelligence because it's arcane. And then you mentioned that mummies are tied to religion, and religion in this universe is typically associated with wisdom. So what I wanted to touch on is, what is a undead that's associated with charisma? An eternal undead that draws upon your own native, force of will, as it were.
I've been trying to work on a form of Yeah.
Okay. Politician? Would that be?
No, that's lizard.
No, that's lizard folk.
No, well, that's charisma, isn't it? That's charisma. They've got the charisma, and
I think you nailed it with vampire. That pretty much. Yeah, that's 100%.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, that's interesting because, depending on your degree, it's like, you lean in toward that style of eternal undeadness. And, obviously mummies are probably not going to be the most charismatic because they probably are not, up to snuff. And then all the nerd, the lizard, the witch is the nerd, right? Like they don't know anything else other than the books, So, yeah, I really like that. I really like that, that differentiation between the three.
Yeah, that's a fun classification.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking about Constitution undead and Strength undead. And
just the muscle, just the flexing on you, just
the flesh column.
They're eternally undead purely because of just how swole they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This flesh column is just like flexing.
Exactly.
All right, so there are some pretty crazy ideas there. I'm sure that you can use some of them in your game. And frankly, I feel like a discussion about divine, immortal, undead throughout the different ability scores might be a discussion for the future, since we've already started to touch on that. We'll see how we go with all of this. I don't know what that would look like. Who knows what that would look like? But let us know down in the comments how you would use mummies in your game to make them more interesting, more fun. Heck, whatever will get your players interested in your game is worth giving a go, right? So let us know. Thank you to all my guests for sharing their ideas. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.